Audi's already been pretty successful with the original e-tron, despite it being a bit of a boat. This car, the Q4 e-tron, is a very different beast. Yes, it's another gigantic electric SUV from the four circles. However, it is built on a second generation pure electric platform. That should mean it doesn't come with the same sort of fossil fuel compromise. But let's find out. Before we get into the details though, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment or subscribe. This is the third SUV we've seen based on Volkswagen Group's MEB platform, which the ID.3 also uses. So underneath, the Q4 e-tron has the same basis as the VW ID.4 and Skoda Enyaq, except where the ID.4 in particular is designed to say I'm electric, the Q4 e-tron just looks like an Audi SUV, apart from the solid front grille. For a lot of Audi buyers, that's probably a good thing. This mostly continues on the inside, but we'll get to that in a bit. Overall, it's a decent looking car if you like big SUVs made by Audi. There is quite a wide range of Q4 e-tron models available, with 3 different engine powers and 4 different trim levels. So the basic engine types are the 35 with 168 horsepower, the 40 with 201 horsepower, and the 50, which we have here, with 295 horsepower. The 35 comes with just 52 kilowatt-hour battery, but the other two have 77 kilowatt-hour. The 4 trims are Sport, S-Line, Edition 1 and Vorsprung. Oh, and there's also a Sportback version, so that means there are 24 different versions of the Q4 to choose from. And yes, there is an absolutely enormous list of additional extras you can add on. Paints other than typical Audi grey are £575, apart from a violet metallic, which is £950. Our review car is this colour, and this is one of the more flamboyant options, so you can see the choices are all pretty sober, although white is also available. Each trim comes with a basic alloy wheel, ranging from 19-inch for the Sport, 20-inch for the S-Line and Edition 1, and 21-inch for the Vorsprung. But there are some design choices available for a bit extra too. One of our favourite Audi options, which this car has, is Matrix LED headlights. These cost £1,075, and when on main beam, they just dip the bits the system senses are pointed at oncoming traffic. It's incredibly cool and effective. The panoramic sunroof on this car is included with the Vorsprung, but is a £1,250 option on this car. There are a lot of interior options as well, which can add another couple of grand to the price of your car. There is a massive selection of packs that you can choose individually or in 2 bundles. The Comfort and Sound pack and the Technology pack. This includes the augmented reality HUD, which is brilliant, but we'll talk about that a bit later. That pack costs £1,050. The £1,295 Comfort and Sound pack is arguably more important because this includes a reversing camera, which is kind of essential in a car this big, and adaptive cruise. At this point, we should mention that this car is an S-Line with over £10,000 of extras, and it still doesn't have a reversing camera or a heat pump, which is another £950 extra. And not only the cameras are there, but it looks like Audi wants another £1,000 just to turn that on. Another thing this car doesn't have is any kind of whizzy keyless entry, so I have to actually press a traditional key to open it. You'll notice that, oh, this doesn't actually open very much. When you do open it though, some lights on the rear of the car do a really clever Night Rider-y type thing, but that only works at night time, and as it's sort of daytime, then it hasn't actually happened. Let's take a look inside. We said this is pretty standard Audi on the outside, and it is on the inside, mostly. There are definitely some good qualities here, and if you're paying more for an Audi over a VW or Skoda, this is one area where your money is being spent. These are expensive premium Napa leather seat options in our review car, but they are pretty attractive with nice stitching. We like the brushed metal on the dashboard, and the interior ambient lighting, an option extra that you can't see here because it's daytime, is very well executed. The dashboard is more normal looking than an ID.4, so if you just want an Audi interior experience, only electric, it fits the bill. There are some areas we think don't hit quite the right note for an Audi though. These buttons feel like quality, but this plastic bit on the top is a little bit cheap looking. These buttons on the steering wheel are really plasticky too. One thing we do like that's been carried over from the VW MEB SUV platform is just how much room you have inside. These front seats are really spacious, there's loads of headroom and plenty of knee room, so somebody of any size could really drive this car. These seats are also really comfortable, and there's full electronic adjustment including lumbar support, and on this car you saw the switches on the door, there's memory functions for 2 positions as well. All of that is standard on the S-Line and above. There's a reasonably sized cubby under here. You'll notice that this actually lifts up and becomes an armrest at different levels. If you put it open, you can then shut it again. There's 2 cup holders in the central console, and just in front of that you have this area. You see there's a couple of USB ports, 12-volt port here, and what looks like a space to put your smartphone. However, if you put your smartphone there, strangely enough, it doesn't appear to charge. However, what you'll find is that just here is another space to put your smartphone, and if you put your smartphone there, that does charge it. On the negative side, you've only got 1 car charging plate there. On the plus side, it's nicely hooked in by that clip, so it shouldn't go anywhere when you're driving. The glove compartment is surprisingly small for such a big car. I guess Audi drivers don't wear gloves or have tiny hands like Donald Trump. With our cameraman at a bizarre angle on the back seat, looks like he's not doing any work. You've got the controls here for the panoramic sunroof. So this one actually opens up the blind there. You can see it's a full-length panoramic sunroof, which I guess is what the word panoramic actually means. And then this rather natty touch-sensitive thing will actually open the first half of it. And you can see it's really sunny today. It's right in my eyes. I'm blind. The acres of interior space continue into the rear. If you need to carry really huge adults in the back of this car, they'll have no trouble. They could be at least 7 foot and still have somebody who's 6 foot driving as well. Just look at how much legroom I've got. I could have really big knees. The middle seat is obviously not as big as the 2 outer ones, but it's decent enough. An adult could just about manage to stay in that for an hour or so of journey. If you only have 2 people though, of course you can fold this forward and you get a rather nice armrest with a couple of cup holders in it. In the middle you get this rather sophisticated array of bits and bobs. You've got vents for the 2 rear passengers. This is actually controls for a tri-zone climate control, which is standard on all the cars. It's a really nice feature. Then you've got a couple of USB ports and a 12-volt supply in the back. So that's pretty comprehensive. And thankfully there are nets on the back of the front seats for kids to put their copies of Samuel Pepys or whatever it is kids read these days. You'll also notice the speakers are made by Sonos and they have separate speakers in the rear as well. The 2 outer rear seats have ISOFIX points, as does the front passenger side. This electronic boot release is available with the S-Line and above, but there's no kick open. This is a pretty large boot, 520 litres. However, it's worth mentioning that the VW ID4 has 543 and the Enyaq a massive 585 litres in their boots. There's also this space underneath the boot floor, and you see it's completely full of cables. You can get a commando cable for use when you're going camping. Great for campsite hookups. And you get the granny charger, and that's probably the obligatory warning chevron thing that you can put out as well. Yeah, lots of cables. Very nice. Of course, you can get a fair bit more boot space if you just take this off and pop this open. This is not quite as premium as you might expect from an Audi. One thing that is really nice though is that these seats have a you see that goes forward, so you can get the 20, 40, and then this one is 40 as well. And pretty flat boot. This capacity is 1,490 litres, but again, that is considerably behind the VW ID4 or Skoda Enyaq. This is about as much as a small to medium-sized estate car, so it's pretty decent, but you might expect a bit more in a really big SUV like this. Another thing we should point out is this car can tow. The 35 and 40 are allowed to tow up to 1,000 kilograms braked, and this one, the 50, can do 1,200 kilograms braked, and they can do 750 kilograms unbraked, which is decent. However, one thing we should point out is that the Audi doesn't specifically supply a tow bar with this car, so you'd have to get that added separately. Well, that's enough about the boot. Let's talk about the range next. So, talking about range, there are 2 different battery sizes with this car. You get of course the battery isn't in here because this is a MEB platform car. So this is all the electronic gubbins rather than the battery, which is under the floor for the passengers and drivers. A driver, there should only be one, unless you have a backseat driver. So there are 52 and 77 kilowatt hour battery options, but you only get those with specific car type. So the 35 is the only one that has the 52 kilowatt hour battery, and that one lasts for 208 miles maximum WLTP, although obviously if you have larger wheels that goes down. The 40 and 50 both get the 77 kilowatt hour battery, and with the rear wheel drive only 40, that gives you up to 316 miles of range, and with the dual motor 50, that gives you up to 299 miles of range. But to give you an idea of how much that drops with bigger wheels, if you get the Vorsprung edition, which has 21-inch wheels, you're actually only getting 280 miles of range with that battery. These are all great figures, but we should also point out that the Ford Mustang Mach-E goes just that little bit further. The smaller battery has 100 kilowatt charging, and the bigger battery 125 kilowatt charging, which means they actually take about the same time to get to 80% on a DC charger, which is 38 minutes. It will take 11.5 hours on a 7 kilowatt AC supply, or 7.5 hours with a smaller battery. This isn't the most frugal car though. The 35 is about 3.5p a mile on a 14p per kilowatt hour supply. The 40 is slightly better, 3.4p, and this 50 is 3.6p, bearing in mind that the Skoda Enyaq is more like 3.2, so that is actually a cheaper car to run than this is. Let's talk about the general controls of this car, starting with this hexagonal steering wheel, which yes, is a 285 pound extra. While we like the way this steering wheel looks, the buttons either side of the crossbar are somewhat cheap in feel, and it's quite easy to accidentally trip the voice control on this one on the right when trying to change volume. On the left, these buttons control things about the way the display behind the steering wheel operates, including menus. And as we mentioned before, this one does the voice control and volume and of course obviously the phone there as well. These paddle shifters for controlling regenerative braking also only come with a hexagonal steering wheel. On this right hand stalk, you've got all the controls for the windscreen wipers. The left hand side is for lights, and underneath the lights is another stalk for operating the cruise control. Turning on the car is just a push of the brake pedal. These light controls, the buttons are a little bit similar to the ID4s, maybe not quite the standard we'd expect from Audi. However, these controls in the central console definitely have a more like an Audi feel about them. You do get a start-stop button, but that's really only for turning on the media control system when you're not actually about to drive the car. This is actually a really good audio control system. You can kind of fondly move it up and down to turn the volume up and down on the stereo. These are the drive controls. You pull once back for drive and another time for B mode, and then back forwards for neutral, reverse, and then you've got park. A couple of buttons for operating the sensors and the parking sensors here. There's a really big one for the hazard lights, which is good if you get into some hazards. And there's a full set of discrete controls for the air conditioning, which as you can see is dual zoned. In fact, as you mentioned earlier, it's actually triple zoned. So you'll see that the instrument panel behind the steering wheel mimics an analog panel with these two dials. On the left you have how much power is being delivered and if you're regenerating. On the right is a speedo, and in the middle you've got all these different things. You can have a trip meter, you can have that's to do with media device being connected or a phone being connected, and then there's a map there which we went through, and you can also change the view to have smaller or bigger dials. You also notice that this is Google's satellite view, which is quite nice in the middle there. And of course it has this actually quite excellent head-up display, which is a bit out of focus here, really hard for the camera to focus on it. You can see that it's got the speed limit on the left, it's got your current speed, which we're not traveling at all, on the right, and you'll see those two lines which give you indication of whether you're you're actually hitting the side of a lane, and it'll warn, it'll go orange. And one thing you can't see on there is it will also give you arrows or a roundabout to show your next navigation direction, which is really useful. All cars get this 10.1-inch media screen, which is reasonably well designed. The home screen has these three modes which give you all the different settings. You'll see there's a radio there, DAB radio. You can connect a media device, we don't have one connected at the moment, connect your telephone, navigation. You can see as standard it has the Google satellite view. You can search for a destination that way, quite useful. You can search via various keywords. Go to Pizza Express if you really want to, get a calabrese, and go back to the home screen. various phone apps you can add. This one doesn't seem to have any at the moment. Car settings in there, charging and efficiency, loads of stuff there. If we go back, you can actually change the way. I've got the suspension on dynamic, so there's lots of different settings for that. Parking aid. As we said, this car doesn't have a reversing camera. Going back to there, got some set up some favourites, further settings, reasonably well laid out. Change the way the display looks. You can actually work the how the head-up display works. Is it augmented reality or basic? Really nice option on that. Various different entertainment settings. Quite a lot of stuff in there, and there's the radio, media devices, phone, navigation. However, if we do have one criticism, it's that, as you can see, it's a little bit sluggish compared to some media displays that we've seen in other cars. One thing we should mention is that this car does actually come with a 3-year subscription to Audi's connected services as well. Where VW launched its mid-range rear-wheel drive ID4 before it launched the lower powered and higher powered GTX models, Audi has launched all its versions of that at the same time. This is the 50 version with 299 PS or 295 horsepower, same thing, and that allows it to sprint to 62 miles per hour in 6.2 seconds. Then there's a 204 PS 40 version with rear-wheel drive, which is exactly the same spec as the original ID4 First Edition. That hits 62 in 8.5 seconds. The 35 version has 170 PS and takes 9 seconds to hit 62. In other words, the Audi Q4 e-tron 50 is equivalent to the VW ID4 GTX. It's fast enough in a straight line for a big SUV, but nowhere near as quick as the Volvo XC40 or the all-wheel drive version of the Mustang Mach-E. A Jaguar I-Pace would leave it for dead. It does handle a lot better than the original e-tron, which is a bit like driving your sofa down the street. The Audi Q4 e-tron 50 is a whopping 400 kilograms lighter than the original e-tron, and you can really feel that much lighter weight when you're going around corners. However, you still couldn't really call this a sports SUV because it still weighs over 2.1 tons. The low center of gravity does mean that it will corner better than a similar petrol SUV of this kind of weight. However, you still want to be a bit careful carrying too much speed into a corner on a twisty A road. Still, this car is fast enough to monster most petrol cars around town and on dual carriageways. In dynamic mode, the ride is a bit firmer than some SUVs that we've driven, but it does get softer if you swap it down to comfort mode. That says, in whichever mode you use, the size and stance feel absolutely perfect on a motorway. With comfortable seats and decent range, it's a great car for extensive motorway trips. It's a real barnstormer. The review model we've been given has plenty of safety tech on board. We've already mentioned the HUD, which has lane departure warnings built in. You see a glowing orange light as you stray across the dotted line on a dual carriageway with a little bit of haptic feedback on the steering wheel. It's an effective implementation. You get a basic version of this system even if you don't have the HUD. Lane departure warning is standard on all cars, as is basic cruise control, front collision and parking sensors. This car also has blind spot detection, which you can see is an orange thing on the wing mirror. The blind spot detection is part of the £650 Safety Package Plus. It also includes rear cross traffic assist, which is handy if you're reversing onto a busy road. For £1,425, you can get the Advanced Assistant Package. That gives you adaptive cruise control, advanced parking sensors, and yes, that reversing camera we keep asking for. Alternatively, you could pay £1,295 for that Comfort and Sound pack, which also gives you the reversing camera. To further complicate things, with that Advanced Assistant package, you also have to pay that £285 for this hexagonal steering wheel. So that's £1,710 in total. Ka-ching! In other words, to get the kind of safety features that come as standard on a lot of Korean cars, you're going to have to put together a couple of £1,000 in optional extras. That is all very typical of German cars. The price range for the Audi e-tron models is extensive. The 35 starts at just under 41k, the 40 at just under 45k, and the 50 we've got here starts at just over 51k. That doesn't sound a lot for an Audi, but add on those options and the price goes up fast. The top of the range Vorsprung trim will cost you over £65,000. This S-Line 50 is over 63k with all its options. Sportback versions of the Q4 are around £1,500 more than the normal backed options. In other words, there is no value option in this range, considering that the basic Skoda Enyaq is only 32k. However, the equivalent petrol SUV would be the Q5, which starts at closer to 42k, so in Audi world this is reasonably priced. In everybody else's world it's actually pretty expensive, especially when you add on all those options. We really think there should be a cheaper way to get that reversing camera, which is kind of essential in a car this size. Warranty is standard for a European car, which is 3 years or 60,000 miles, then 3 years for paint and 12 years for perforation. Service interval is 2 years or 19,000 miles, whichever is sooner, but we have no indication of cost. At least Audi's not expecting you to bring in the car every year when it doesn't have oil or spark plugs. Insurance groups start at 25 for the 35 up to 39 for the 50. So this car would be cheaper to insure than a Tesla Model 3, but more than an ID4 GTX, which ranges from group 34 to 36 depending on which version you get. Summing that all up, if you want the Audi SUV experience only electric, there's nothing to stop you going for this car. One last thing, we'll go back to the biggest negative of this car, which is that reversing camera, or lack thereof. The actual graphic for parking with just the sensors is pretty good, but why you can't have a camera on a standard on a car this big is beyond us. It's really necessary with a massive SUV. Of all the Volkswagen MEB platform electric SUVs we've tested, the Audi Q4 e-tron is the most expensive, but Audi is also one of Volkswagen's most premium brands. Is it worth the extra over an ID4 or Skoda Enyaq? On a basic level, no, and if you want humongous boot space, the Skoda Enyaq is definitely the way to go. However, if what you're after is the Audi SUV experience only electric, it isn't that expensive. In fact, it's about the same price as a Q5. It drives well, the 50 is adequately quick, it's got a decent range, and there's a really good amount of space, particularly for passengers. If what you're after is an Audi, it's a really good choice. Thanks for watching, and as we said before, if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe.